I had buried friends before. I had buried my parents. But nothing prepared me for lowering Linda into the ground. 50 years of mornings and nights, laughter and arguments, shared bills and shared prayers gone in the space of one church service. And then, as if grief wasn't cruel enough, my own daughter twisted the knife. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. The organ had just started its slow hymn when I heard it. A whisper. Sharp cutting meant to stay between her and her husband. But I caught every word. Now the assets belong to us. Dad has nothing left. For a second I thought my chest might give out right there in the pew. My wife's body lay not 20 feet away, and my daughter, my little girl who once begged me to carry her on my shoulders, was already carving up what she thought was hers. I didn't turn, didn't breathe. My hands locked around the wood of the pew until my knuckles turned bone white. A man can die twice, I realized, once when his wife is lowered into the earth, and once when his own child writes him off as nothing. Around me, mourners sniffled and bowed their heads. The air smelled of lilies and candle wax, heavy and sweet, almost suffocating. The words Emily had whispered cut through it all clearer than the pastor's prayer. I kept still, but inside my heart was a storm. Reverend John caught my eye from the pulpit. He had known Linda since she sang in the church choir as a teenager. Maybe he read something in my face because his gaze lingered steady and knowing. When the service ended, and people began shuffling out their hands, brushing mine with murmured condolences, Reverend John leaned close. "You don't have to carry this alone, Robert," he said. His voice was low, firm, the kind that tried to plant roots in shaken ground. I wanted to answer, to tell him what I had heard. But how could I? To speak it out loud felt like admitting a second death. Outside, the November air bit at my skin, sharp and restless. Folks lingered in the churchyard, swapping town gossip, promising to bring casseroles later. Emily and Mark stood apart from the rest, their heads bent close, Mark's hand resting on her back like a seal of possession. From a distance, I watched them. My chest tightened. I should have seen grief on my daughter's face, but all I saw was calculation. David came to stand beside me, his voice soft. "You holding up, Dad?" I nodded, though the truth was heavier. He followed my gaze toward his sister and frowned, but said nothing. Maybe he hadn't heard the whisper. Maybe that was mercy. People filed past, some with hugs, some with quick nods. The sound of the church bell faded, and yet Emily's words rang louder than anything. Dad has nothing left. That was the moment I knew my fight wasn't just with grief, it was with my own blood. That night the house groaned with silence. The kind of silence that doesn't comfort, it presses, seeps into your bones, and makes every shadow feel heavier than it is. For the first time in half a century, Linda wasn't here to fill the rooms with her humming or the clatter of her dishes. All I had was the echo of our children's voices, one offering comfort, the other carving me out of her future. I tried lying in bed, but the ceiling seemed to stare back, blank and unforgiving. The whisper replayed in my head on a cruel loop. At last I rose, shuffled to the kitchen, and poured a cup of coffee, though my doctor would have scolded me for it. The steam curled upward, and for a heartbeat I imagined Linda across from me, smiling gently at my stubbornness. The memory of Emily as a little girl came uninvited. She had once tugged my hand across Main Street, her small fingers clutching mine like I was her whole world. I had carried her on my shoulders at the county fair, her laughter bright enough to drown out the roar of carnival rides. How did that child become the woman who whispered me into irrelevance at her own mother's funeral? The doorbell rang the next morning, jolting me out of those thoughts. I opened the door to find Mrs. Peterson, my neighbor for 30 years, holding a plate of lemon bars. Her eyes softened when she saw me. "Robert, I just wanted to check in. These days after the funeral can be the roughest." I thanked her, invited her in. We sat in the living room, the curtains half drawn. Her gaze landed on Linda's favorite chair, the empty one by the window. "It doesn't feel real yet, does it?" she asked. I shook my head, words stuck in my throat. After a pause, she leaned closer. "I probably shouldn't repeat gossip, but folks are saying Emily's been talking, saying this house will be hers soon." I felt my jaw clench until it hurt. So Emily's whisper hadn't been just for Mark. She'd let it spill into the town, letting it take root like weeds. Mrs. Peterson touched my arm. "I'm sorry, Robert. Grief makes people act foolish. Don't let it break you." When she left, the house was emptier than before. The lemon bars sat untouched on the counter. My appetite had gone replaced by something else, something simmering low and steady. That afternoon David came by. His shoulders were tense, his eyes shadowed. "Dad," he said, settling into the chair across from me, "I need you to hear this. Emily and Mark think the will is theirs. They're planning as if you've already stepped aside." I stayed quiet, letting him continue. "They're even talking about conservatorship. Mark says you might not be able to handle things on your own." The words hit harder than a winter wind. To be dismissed by my daughter was one thing. To have my independence threatened in the eyes of the law, that was a new wound. My fingers dug into the armrest until the wood pressed hard lines into my palm. David leaned forward, his voice firm. "I won't let them push you out, Dad. You still have a say. Mom trusted you. So do I." His loyalty stirred something deep in me. Not relief, but resolve. Emily and Mark thought they could whisper me into the shadows, but I still had a voice. And if Linda had left me anything at all, it was the strength to use it. That evening I stood in front of the mantel. Linda's picture stared back, her smile frozen in time. I saw my reflection beside hers. 2 lives bound, 1 ended. 1 tested. "Linda," I whispered, "you always planned ahead. Did you see this coming? Did you leave me something to hold on to?" The house creaked around me, the kind of sound you get in an old Midwestern home after dark. No answer came. But for a fleeting moment I felt her presence close, urging me not to bow, not to yield. Outside, the street lamp flickered and the bare branches scratched at the window pane. I stood there, heart heavy but steady, and knew this much: Emily's whisper might have been meant as my ending. But maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of a fight I hadn't realized I still had in me. A few days after the funeral, the house still smelled of casseroles and pies left behind by neighbors. The kitchen counters were cluttered with half-empty aluminum pans, each one a reminder of pity more than kindness. Folks in Springfield meant well, but food could never fill the hole Linda left behind. That evening, Emily insisted we all sit down together for dinner. She brought Mark and their 2 kids, and David showed up late, still in his work shirt, tired but willing. I didn't have much appetite, but I set the table anyway. It felt like the right thing to do, as if the act alone might stitch the family back together. We gathered around Linda's oak table. The one she'd polished so many times it still caught the light from the chandelier. I sat at the head where I always had, but without Linda. At the other end, the table seemed longer, emptier. The meal began in silence. The clink of silverware against plates fill in the gaps where Linda's voice used to be. Emily picked at her food for a while before she spoke, her tone light, but her words heavy. "Dad, with everything that's happened, I think we should start talking about arrangements. The house, the accounts, what Mom left behind." The fork in my hand paused midair. My stomach turned tighter than a knot. David looked up sharply. "Emily, not now. We just buried Mom. Can't we have one dinner without this?" Mark cleared his throat, leaning back in his chair like he was the only adult in the room. "It's practical, David. Life goes on. Bills need paying and responsibilities shift. Your father's not getting any younger." I swallowed hard, letting the words settle like stones in my gut. Emily added quickly, "We just want to make sure things are handled properly. Mom would have wanted us to be organized." David's jaw tightened. He set down his fork, the clink sharp in the air. "No, Emily. Mom would have wanted us to honor her memory, not fight over her things like scavengers." The table went still. Mark's smile thinned. Emily's cheeks flushed. I sat there listening, every word pressing down on me like another shovel of dirt. My own children divided. Linda would have hated this. Mark broke the silence with a casual shrug that felt anything but casual. "Look, Robert's health isn't what it used to be. Maybe it's time to consider some options. A retirement home, maybe. That way he doesn't have to worry about all this paperwork or the upkeep on this big old house." The room spun for a moment. My vision narrowed to the edges of my plate. Retirement home. As if I were a burden to be tucked away. David snapped, his voice louder than I'd ever heard at this table. "Are you serious, Mark? He just lost his wife. He's still standing on his own 2 feet. Don't you dare talk about shipping him off." Emily tried to smooth it over, but her voice trembled. "No one is talking about shipping Dad off. We have to think ahead. It's about what's best for him." I felt my throat tighten. Best for me or best for them? I pushed my chair back slightly, the scrape of wood on tile loud in the silence. My hands rested flat on the table, steady, though my heart pounded. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I'm right here, I said quietly. If there are decisions to be made about my life, I'll be the one making them. The words hung in the air like smoke. No one moved. Emily looked down at her plate. Mark tapped his finger against his glass, restless. David finally leaned back, exhaling hard like he'd been holding his breath for too long. Dinner went on after that, but the food tasted like ash in my mouth. The cracks in the family had widened, and I knew they wouldn't close easily. Later that night, when the dishes were done and the house was quiet again, I sat alone at the table, tracing the grooves Linda's hands had worn into the wood over the years. Mark's words echoed in my head. Retirement home, paperwork, accounts. For the first time, a new fear rooted itself inside me. Not just of losing Linda, but of losing myself, my dignity, my place. And I knew then Emily's whisper at the funeral hadn't been a slip of grief. It was the opening move in something larger. The night stretched long after everyone left. I wandered the house, picking up stray glasses. Napkins left on the counter, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. My hands moved, but my mind stayed stuck at that table, replaying Mark's words until they were carved into me. Retirement home. It was more than an insult, it was a plan, and I knew it. I drifted into the living room and sat in Linda's rocker. The wood creaked under me, the way it always had under her, a sound that once felt like home, but now felt like warning. I pictured her sitting across from me, arms folded, eyes narrowed, the way she did when the children tested her patience. She'd tell me not to fold, not to let them run me down. The following afternoon, David stopped by. He didn't say much at first, just took a seat at the table and looked around at the empty chairs. "They're not going to stop, Dad," he said finally. "Emily and Mark. They're pushing because they think you'll give in." I leaned back, feeling the old wood steady against me. "Your sister was raised better than this. I don't know what happened." David shook his head. "Mark happened. Bills happened. Life happened. But that doesn't excuse it. She can't erase you like you don't matter." His words should have brought comfort, but they only made the fear more real. My daughter, my own flesh and blood, had allowed her husband's ambitions and her own anxieties to turn me into an obstacle. Later that week, Mrs. Peterson caught me outside trimming her hedges. She gave me that look neighbors do when they know too much. "Robert, I don't mean to pry, but folks at the diner have been talking. Emily's been telling people she'll be moving into your house soon. Some are even asking if you've already signed it over." The words burned hotter than the summer sun on my neck. Even strangers now pictured me gone, erased from the home Linda and I had built. I forced a nod, thanked her, and walked back inside. My hands trembled as I closed the door. I stood there in the hallway, staring at the family photographs that lined the wall: birthdays, graduations, Christmas mornings. Every picture carried Linda's smile, every one a reminder of the family she had believed in. That evening, we gathered again, not for a meal, but for coffee. Emily arrived with her children, their voices filling the rooms with a noise that should have been comforting, but wasn't. Mark made himself comfortable in my armchair, crossing his legs like he already owned the place. He started in lightly casual, as a man talking about the weather. "Robert, this place must feel big now. Too much to keep up with. Maybe you'd be happier somewhere with less to manage. Emily and I can make sure the kids keep this house alive." The words were smooth, but the meaning was jagged. "Take the house. Put me out." I set down my coffee cup slowly, deliberately. "This house isn't just lumber and brick. It's Linda. It's 50 years of mornings and nights. It's mine, Mark. And I'll decide when I'm done with it." The room went still. Emily opened her mouth, closed it again. The children shifted uncomfortably. Mark smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Of course, Robert. Just thinking about your comfort, that's all." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. My silence was the only shield I had left. That night, when everyone was gone, I sat again in the rocker. The house dark, except for the faint glow of the streetlight outside. My fear had sharpened into something else: resolve. Emily's whisper at the funeral had cut me open. Mark's hints at the dinner table had tried to bury me alive. But I wasn't ready to be buried, not yet. Somewhere deep inside, I felt Linda's presence again, steady, as ever urging me forward. I didn't know how yet, but I knew this: I would not let them write me out of my own life. Springfield has always been the kind of town where news travels faster than the mail. A pot of coffee at the diner, a chat after Sunday service, or even a trip to the grocery store. If you weren't careful, your whole life might be laid bare before the town knew what you had for breakfast. That was Linda's gift, though. She carried herself in a way that turned gossip into goodwill. People spoke about her garden the way her roses bloomed longer than anyone else's. They talked about her casseroles at church potlucks, her patience with the choir, her kindness to anyone who needed a ride. But me. After she passed, the tone shifted. And it shifted fast. I found out one morning when Mrs. Peterson knocked on my door. She stood on the porch with her cardigan buttoned all the way to her neck. Her face pulled tight in that way people wear when they have something heavy to deliver. Robert. She began, her voice carrying both caution and sympathy. I hate to be the one to tell you this, but folks have been talking. I let her in, and she perched on the edge of the sofa, smoothing her skirt as if buying time. It's about Emily, she said finally. Word at the diner is that she's been telling people she'll be moving into your house soon, that it's only a matter of time. For a moment the room spun. The morning light through the curtains, the tick of the wall clock, even the smell of Linda's quilt that still clung to the couch, all of it blurred. She said that I asked, though my gut already knew the answer. Mrs. Peterson nodded slowly. I'm sorry, Robert. You know how it is in a town like this. Once the words are out, they spread like dandelion seeds. Folks at church are already whispering. The betrayal sank deeper. Emily's whisper at the funeral had been a dagger, but this was salt rubbed into the wound. She hadn't just whispered to Mark. She'd carried it into the world, feeding it to neighbors, letting it grow, until even strangers looked at me with pity in their eyes. Mrs. Peterson patted my hand. People will always talk, but you can't let them write your story for you. Hold your head up, Robert. That's what Linda would have wanted. After she left, the house felt colder. I wandered from room to room, touching the edges of picture frames, running my hand across the quilt Linda had stitched by hand. Everywhere I looked, she was there, and yet the louder memory was Emily's voice repeating again and again, Dad has nothing left. Later that week, I stopped at the diner myself. I needed coffee, or maybe I just needed to test what I'd been told. Sure enough, as soon as I walked in, conversation dipped. Heads turned. People nodded politely, but their eyes told the truth. I was no longer Robert Johnson, husband of Linda, longtime member of First Baptist. I was the old man whose daughter was circling for the kill. I slid into a booth, ordered black coffee, and pretended not to notice the whispers. But each laugh, each side glance chipped at me. I thought of Linda again, how she would have clasped my hand under the table, reminding me that dignity wasn't given. It was held even when others tried to strip it away. When I got home, I stood in front of the mantel where her picture sat. They're talking about us, Linda, I murmured. About Emily, about this house. Her smile in the frame didn't falter. Mine did. That evening, as I sat in the rocker, David stopped by. He kicked his shoes off at the door, set a grocery bag on the counter, and sighed. I heard it too, Dad. Emily's been talking. People at work asked me if I was moving back into my childhood home. Can you believe that his voice was full of frustration, but under it was something else, fear. Not for himself, but for me. I don't know what Mom left in that he admitted, but I know she wouldn't want this. She wouldn't want you humiliated like this. His words echoed my own thoughts, though saying them aloud made them feel heavier. That night alone again, I sat at the table where we had eaten so many family meals. The chair across from me was empty as always now. I leaned back, listening to the creak of the wood, and felt myself cornered not just by my daughter, but by the weight of the whole town's eyes. It was then that the phone rang. A calm, professional voice introduced himself as Thomas Baker, attorney at law. He said he represented Linda's estate, and that it was time to gather for the reading of the will. The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. Ripples spread through me, fear, anger, a flicker of hope I barely dared to admit. As I hung up, my hands trembled. The moment I had dreaded, and maybe the only moment that could bring clarity, was drawing near. Sleep didn't come easy that night. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the old furnace and the occasional bark of a neighbor's dog. Every sound felt sharper, as if the whole world was reminding me I was alone, and that soon even my own home might slip through my fingers. By morning, my thoughts had hardened into something heavier. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and unfolded the church bulletin from the last Sunday service. Linda's name was printed in bold letters under the announcements "In loving memory." I traced my finger over the ink, the letters smudging faintly, and thought about how quickly a life becomes a headline, a footnote in a weekly leaflet. Later, I walked down Main Street trying to shake the heaviness. At the grocery store, I overheard two women in the produce aisle. They hushed when they saw me, but not before I caught one sentence. "Emily says it won't be long before she has the keys." I didn't confront them. I just stood there holding an apple in my hand until my knuckles whitened, then set it back and left without buying anything. On the way home, I stopped by the cemetery. The flowers on Linda's grave were still fresh, though a little wilted at the edges. I knelt down, the cold seeping through my knees, and whispered, "They're circling Linda. They think I'm too old, too weak, too blind to see it, but I see it." The wind stirred, carrying the faint scent of cut grass, and for a moment I imagined it was her answer. That evening, David came again. He brought a pie from the diner and tried to lighten the mood, but his eyes betrayed him. He pushed the plate toward me and leaned forward. "Dad, you don't have to take this lying down. If Emily and Mark are talking like this, they're planning something bigger. You need to be ready." I sighed, rubbing my temples. "Ready for what, David?" "For my own daughter to drag me through court, for my neighbors to write me off before the ink is dry." He shook his head firmly. "Ready to fight. Mom wouldn't have left you unprotected. I know she didn't." His words struck me not because I believed them fully, but because I wanted to. Linda was always one step ahead. She managed the bills, kept the records filed away, every important paper. If anyone had thought of the future, it was her. After David left, I sat in Linda's rocker again. The house was dim except for the porch light flickering through the curtains. I closed my eyes and remembered her voice, calm and steady. "Don't give up, Robert. Don't let them take what's yours." When the phone rang again the next morning, it startled me. I lifted the receiver and there was that voice once more, Thomas Baker, the attorney. "Mr. Johnson." He said, his tone measured. "We're scheduling the reading of your late wife's will. I'll need you and your family to come to my office later this week." My chest tightened. The words felt final, like the tolling of a bell. This was it, the moment where whispers and gossip would either be proven or silenced. After I hung up, I sat still for a long while staring at Linda's picture. "If you left me something, Linda," I whispered, "let it be enough. Let it be the strength to face them." The house creaked around me, the floor settling the way old houses do. But in that sound, I heard something else, almost like an answer, almost like a promise. I stood up steadier than I had in weeks. Whatever the will revealed, it would be the turning point. And for the first time since the funeral, I felt not just grief or fear, but a strange, simmering determination. The storm was coming, and I would be ready. The call from Thomas Baker lingered in my ears long after I hung up. The will. The words rolled around inside me like loose stones in a bucket. No matter what Linda had written, it was going to tear the scab off every wound this family carried. That evening, I was sitting on the porch, nursing a cup of coffee gone cold, when David pulled into the driveway. His old pickup rattled the way it always had a sound I could recognize even before I saw the headlights. He stepped out, his shoulders squared, but his face worn with the kind of fatigue that comes from carrying more than his share. He didn't bother with pleasantries. He climbed the steps, leaned against the porch rail, and let out a long breath. "Dad," he said, his voice low, "you've got to be careful. Emily and Mark, they're not going to play fair." The words struck with the weight of truth I didn't want to face. I stared into my cup, the coffee gone bitter. David continued. "I overheard them last night after dinner. Mark was talking about paperwork, about getting things signed before the reading. He said if you drag your feet, they got another way to make sure you're out of the picture." I raised my eyes to his. "What did he mean?" David hesitated, jaw working. "Conservatorship. They've been looking into it. If they can convince a court you can't handle your affairs, they could take control of everything." The word hit me like a slap. Conservatorship. I'd heard stories old men stripped of their independence shuffled into homes, their savings drained by the very children who were supposed to protect them. I set the cup down on the porch rail, my hand trembling just enough that the liquid sloshed. "I'm not incompetent," I muttered. "I'm grieving, not gone. I know that," David said quickly. "But Mark doesn't care. He'll twist anything he can. Emily, she's letting him pull the strings. You have to be ready for them. We sat in silence for a while, the night air heavy with the smell of cut grass and the hum of crickets. Finally, I said, "Your mother always believed Emily would come around. She thought she'd find her footing, raise her kids right, make her peace. I never imagined it would come to this." David's gaze softened, but there was steel under it. "Dad, you can't keep seeing Emily as the little girl who used to sit on your shoulders. You've got to see her as she is now. And right now, she's someone who's about to take everything you've got if you let her." His words stung because they were true. Later that week, Reverend John stopped by. He had a way of showing up just when the walls felt like they were closing in. He didn't knock, just tapped lightly on the door frame before stepping into the kitchen. "I thought you might need company," he said, setting down a bag with a loaf of bread from the church bake sale. We sat at the table, the late afternoon sun spilling across the linoleum. He didn't rush, didn't press. That was his gift. Finally, he leaned forward. "Robert, I've been hearing things. Emily's been asking questions about the process for conservatorship, about what it takes to have someone declared unable to manage their own life." My stomach dropped. To hear it from David was one thing. To hear it confirmed by Reverend John Well, that was something else entirely. "I'm not helpless," I said more to myself than to him. "No, you're not," he agreed. "But you need to know what you're up against. These processes, they can be twisted. I've seen good men stripped of their dignity because someone made the right argument to the wrong judge." I rubbed my temples, the words settling in my bones. The funeral had taken Linda. The whispers had taken my reputation. And now Emily wanted to take the rest. Reverend John placed a hand on mine. "Don't let them define you, Robert. You've still got your voice. Use it. And remember, you're not alone in this fight." After he left, I walked into the living room. Linda's picture waited for me on the mantel, her smile eternal. I stood there, the house quiet, but for the ticking clock. "Did you protect me?" I whispered. "Did you see this coming?" The silence answered back, heavy and unbroken. But in that silence, I felt the weight of my own fear more than ever. For the first time, it wasn't just grief that threatened me. It was the possibility of losing everything else too, my home, my name, my right to live on my own terms. And it left me wondering if Linda had left me more than memories. That night, the house seemed to hold its breath. I walked the hallway, slowly stopping to glance at the photographs that lined the walls. There was Emily in her high school cap and gown, David holding his first baseball glove, Linda standing between them, with that same proud smile she carried everywhere. I pressed my hand to the frame, feeling the glass cool against my palm, and wondered how those bright beginnings had led us here. Sleep eluded me again. I drifted from the living room to the porch, listening to the cicadas and the far-off rumble of a train. Every sound reminded me that time was moving forward whether I was ready or not. And with it came the storm of Emily's ambition, Mark's schemes, and the whispers of a town eager to see how it would all unfold. The next morning, David returned. He was dressed in work clothes, grease still on his hands, but his eyes were steady. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, spreading out some pamphlets he had picked up. Information about elder rights, legal protections numbers for community advocates. "Dad," he said, "you don't have to go through this blind. If they try to pull anything, there are people who can help. APS Legal Aid, even Reverend John said he'd stand by you." I looked at the papers, the neat columns of words, and felt both gratitude and dread. Gratitude that David was on my side. Dread that it had come to this, my own son preparing me for battle against my own daughter. "Do you really think Emily would go that far?" I asked. David hesitated. "I think Mark would. And Emily, she's letting him do the thinking for her. That's enough." The truth of it cut deep. Emily had once been a child who clung to my hand in crowded rooms, who begged for one more bedtime story, who cried when I left for business trips. Now she was letting a man's hunger for control turn her against me. Later in the week, Reverend John stopped by again. He carried a small Bible tucked under his arm, but it was his presence more than the book that steadied me. We sat in the living room, the late light filtering through the lace curtains Linda had hung years ago. "Robert," he said gently, "fear is natural, but don't let it silence you. You have more strength than you realize. Linda trusted you with her life. Don't forget that. I nodded, though my throat felt tight. It's hard, John. Hard to believe in myself when even my own daughter doesn't. He placed a hand on my shoulder. Then believe in Linda's choice. She saw something in you that Emily cannot see right now. Hold on to that. After he left, I lingered in the living room staring at Linda's photo once more. I whispered into the stillness, the words trembling out of me. Did you protect me? Did you see this coming? The clock ticked in answer, steady and unyielding. I closed my eyes, and for a moment I almost felt her there. Her hand on my arm, her voice in my ear. Not gone, not forgotten, but standing guard in the only way she could. And I realized then I could not surrender, not now. The will was coming, and with it, the chance to face my children, to claim my dignity, to prove that I was not a man to be erased. The fear was still there, heavy as stone. But beneath it, something else stirred resolve. The weight of Reverend John's words still clung to me like a damp coat. Conservatorship. The threat of being stripped of everything I was by my own daughter. The thought gnawed at me in the quiet hours until even the ticking of the mantel clock felt like a countdown to something I couldn't control. A few nights later, I found myself sitting alone in the living room, the television murmuring in the background when I heard voices carrying in from the porch. I moved toward the sound, careful not to let the floor creak under me, and there they were, Emily and Mark. They had stepped outside after dinner, their voices sharper than they realized. Mark's tone was firm, almost impatient. Once that will is read, it's ours. You need to stop second-guessing this, Em. Your dad won't fight. He doesn't have it in him. Emily's reply came shaky, almost like a child caught in the dark. You don't understand, Mark. We've been drowning in bills. The credit cards, the mortgage, every month it feels like we're slipping deeper. What if the will isn't enough? What if Mom left more to David? What if Mark cut her off? She didn't. Trust me. I've seen the way these things go. He'll get sentimental junk. You'll get the house, the accounts, the rest. And if Robert makes noise, we'll deal with him. I told you we can push the conservatorship if it comes to that. My stomach nodded. Emily wasn't just greedy, she was desperate. And desperation was just another word for dangerous. Through the half-open window, I could see her wringing her hands, her shoulders hunched. I hate this, Mark. I hate talking about Dad like he's not even human anymore. Then stop thinking about it, Mark snapped. Think about the kids. Think about how much easier it'll be once we're not living paycheck to paycheck. Don't let guilt get in the way of survival. Their footsteps shifted, and I pulled back into the shadows before they could see me. I stood there for a long time staring at the floor, torn between rage and heartbreak. Emily wasn't blind to what she was doing. She was torn. But instead of stepping back, she was letting Mark harden her heart. The next morning, David stopped by with a box of tools. He said the porch rail needed tightening, though I suspected he wanted an excuse to check on me. As he worked, I told him what I'd overheard, leaving out none of the bitterness. His jaw clenched as he listened. So it's about money, he muttered. I should have known. Emily's been putting on a brave face, but I've seen the bills stacking up in her kitchen. Mark's business isn't doing well, and they've been covering it with debt. That's why he's pushing her so hard. I felt a pang of pity even as anger surged. Struggling to stay afloat was one thing. Plotting to steal from your own father was another. David set down his wrench, looking me square in the eye. Dad, you can't sign anything. Promise me. Whatever they put in front of you, don't you dare. I nodded the promise, forming heavy on my tongue. I won't. That evening, the test came sooner than I expected. Emily and Mark showed up unannounced, carrying a folder thick with papers. Dad, Emily began, her voice tight but coated in sweetness. We thought we'd make things easier. Just some documents to get ahead of the process, so when the will is read, everything's smooth. Mark slid the folder across the table like a dealer pushing chips. Just signatures. Nothing complicated. It'll save you stress. I looked down at the papers, the black ink crisp, the lines waiting for my name. Something in my chest twisted anger, yes, but also a fierce clarity. I pushed the folder back. No. Emily blinked, startled. Dad, you didn't even read them. I don't need to, I said, my voice low but steady. I know when my own daughter and her husband are trying to put me in a corner. The silence that followed was jagged, sharp as broken glass. Mark's smile froze, his jaw tightening. Emily's eyes darted, her breath quickening. The fault lines in our family weren't just cracks anymore. They were widening into a chasm. Emily's face flushed, and for a moment she looked more like the frightened girl who once clutched Linda's skirt at Sunday school than the woman sitting across from me now. But the softness didn't last. Mark leaned forward, his eyes narrowing, his hand pressing the folder closer to me. "Robert, don't make this harder than it has to be. You sign now and everything goes smoothly. No court battles, no ugly headlines. Just peace." Peace for who, I asked quietly, because it sure doesn't sound like peace for me. The muscles in his jaw jumped. Emily's lips trembled as she tried to speak, but Mark cut her off. "Look, you're not getting any younger. It's time to think about what's best for the family. Best for the family," I repeated the words, tasting bitter. "You mean best for your wallet?" His smile slipped. For the first time I saw the calculation falter. Emily tugged at his arm. "Mark, stop. This isn't the way." But he yanked his arm back, eyes locked on me. "You've had your time, Robert. The house, the money, the decisions. Now it's our turn. You can either step aside gracefully or be forced aside. It's that simple." I stood then, my legs stiff but steady. I've buried my wife, and now I sit here being told by my daughter's husband that my life is over. Well, I'll tell you this. I'm not signing anything. Not tonight, not ever. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Emily looked down, tears brimming in her eyes. Mark grabbed the folder and shoved it back into his bag with a snap. "This isn't over." He muttered, his voice low and sharp. "No," I said, "it's not." They left in a storm of slammed doors and muttered curses. The house shook with their absence, the air still buzzing with the venom they had spilled. I sat back down at the table, my hands trembling, not from weakness, but from the adrenaline of standing my ground. Later that night, David called. He must have heard from someone news traveled fast in Springfield. His voice was tight with worry. "Dad, I heard they came by. Please tell me you didn't sign." "I didn't," I said firmly, "and I won't." He let out a long breath, relief flooding through the phone line. "Good, that's good. Just hold steady. They'll try again, but you've got me. You've got Reverend John. You're not alone in this." I wanted to believe him. I needed to. But even as I thanked him, a shadow lingered. Emily's tears haunted me, proof that she wasn't entirely lost, but also that she was too far gone to pull back on her own. And Mark, his threat, echoed in my ears like the toll of a bell. As the house settled around me, I looked up at Linda's picture once more. "They're coming harder now," I whispered. But I said no. I hope that's enough. The clock ticked in reply, steady and unyielding. The cracks had widened the ground, shifting beneath us all, and I knew the tremors were only the beginning of the quake. The night after Emily and Mark stormed out, I sat in the quiet house, my body still humming from the confrontation. It wasn't just the papers or Mark's threats that stayed with me. It was the look on Emily's face, the tears, the hesitation, the way she seemed pulled between two worlds. For a fleeting moment, I wanted to believe she might still turn back. But then I remembered her silence when Mark spoke of conservatorship, and the hope inside me soured. The days that followed only deepened the sense of isolation. I noticed it first at the grocery store, where the cashier I'd known for years suddenly spoke to me with an extra softness, like I was a fragile vase that might topple at any second. Then at church, when the hymns rose and the congregation shuffled out into the sunny courtyard, the conversations grew quieter whenever I passed. Smiles were polite, but their eyes carried pity or worse, judgment. Mrs. Peterson, ever the bearer of uncomfortable truths, finally said what no one else dared. She caught me by the arm after Sunday service, her grip firmer than her age should allow. "Robert," she said, lowering her voice, "people talk. They think your daughter's waiting for you to fall, waiting to snatch up the pieces before the dust even settles." The words cut sharper because I knew she believed them. And if she believed them, so did half the town. I forced a smile, thanked her, and walked to my car, but the shame clung to me like a shadow. It wasn't just my family breaking apart now, it was the slow unraveling of how the world saw me. No longer Robert Johnson, steady husband of Linda, proud father of two. I was becoming the old man on borrowed time, the one whispered about in pews and diner booths. At home, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold. I stared at the steamless liquid and thought of Linda, of all the times she had reassured me when life felt too heavy. She would have taken my hand and said, "Robert, don't let other people's talk define you. But she wasn't here, and the voices outside my door were louder than my own. That night, David stopped by again. He could see the weight on me before I said a word. "They're treating you different, aren't they?" he asked, pulling out a chair. I nodded. "It's like I'm already gone, like the town's written me off before a judge ever could." David leaned forward. "Don't let them get in your head. You're not powerless, Dad. They only win if you start believing you're as weak as they say." I wanted to take his words to heart, but even as he spoke, I felt the ache of betrayal gnawing deeper. Because it wasn't just the town, it was Emily, my own daughter. I sat awake long after David left, listening to the old house creak around me. The betrayal weighed heavier than grief itself. Grief is a storm. You endure it. And eventually it passes, but betrayal lives inside you. And with the reading of the will drawing closer, I knew every eye Emily's marks David's. The whole town's would soon be fixed on me, waiting to see if I stood or fell. The weight of those whispers grew heavier with each passing day. Even the smallest errands seemed like trials. At the post office, I felt eyes linger on me as though people were measuring how much longer I could manage on my own. At the diner, where I once traded jokes with the waitress over black coffee and apple pie, the laughter felt forced. The conversation clipped. I wasn't Robert anymore. I was a story, one of those cautionary tales folks pass around when they don't know what else to say. One afternoon, I walked the neighborhood just to clear my head. Mrs. Peterson was out pruning her rose bushes, and she waved me over. Her tone carried that mix of concern and blunt honesty she never could hide. "Robert, don't let them smell weakness. Once people start thinking you're fading, they'll circle like buzzards. Don't give them that satisfaction." I nodded, but her words only echoed what I already feared. My own daughter had given them reason to doubt me. That night I sat in the living room, the lamp casting a soft glow over Linda's old quilt draped across the couch. I traced the stitches with my fingers, each one a reminder of her steady hand, her patience. "Linda." I whispered, "They see me as finished, even Emily. How do I fight my own blood without losing what's left of myself?" The only answer was the steady tick of the clock. A few days later, David came by again, his face set in determination. He had a stack of folders under his arm. "Dad, I've been digging. Mark's business is worse off than they let on. Debt collectors, late payments, even a lien notice. That's why he's desperate. That's why he's pushing Emily." I felt a hollow ache in my chest. Emily had let his desperation become hers, and now it had turned into betrayal. David leaned closer, his voice low but firm. "They'll come at you harder as the will gets closer. Don't break. Don't give them the opening they want." I placed a hand on his, grateful for his strength, but weighed down by doubt. "It's hard, David. It's one thing to lose to strangers. It's another to see your own child lining up against you." He squeezed my hand. "Then don't lose Dad. Not to them. Not like this." That night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The betrayal pressed down like a stone on my chest. It wasn't just Emily's words or Mark's threats. It was the way the town looked at me now, as though I'd already fallen and they were just waiting for the ground to catch me. But somewhere beneath the shame and sorrow, something stirred. Maybe it was Linda's memory. Maybe it was David's resolve. Maybe it was simply the truth that I wasn't ready to be erased. The will was coming soon. Every eye would be on me. And for the first time I understood I couldn't just endure the betrayal. I had to carry its weight and use it. The tension in the air was thick enough to taste. After weeks of whispers, confrontations, and sleepless nights, I could feel the storm gathering around me, the pressure building like thunderheads on the horizon. Emily and Mark weren't hiding their intentions anymore. Their confidence had grown bolder, as if they already held the keys to the house and the balance of every account. It was Emily who suggested the family should gather at her place that Sunday afternoon. She framed it as a chance to talk things over, but I knew better. From the moment I walked through her front door, I could see it in the way she moved, chin high, voice crisp, eyes sharp. She was bracing herself to claim victory before the battle had even begun. Mark was no better. He greeted me with a handshake too firm, the kind meant to dominate, and a smile that never reached his eyes. "Glad you could make it, Robert," he said, as though I were a guest in a home he already believed was his. David arrived shortly after me. His presence alone steadied me. He stood tall jaw, set, his very silence a rebuke to Emily and Mark's smugness. We sat around Emily's dining table, a space once filled with birthday cakes and laughter. Now it was a battlefield, each place setting a marker for where the lines were drawn. Emily cleared her throat. Dad, David. With the will being read soon, I think it's important we're all on the same page. Mom wouldn't want division. David let out a sharp laugh. Division, Emily, you and Mark are the ones creating it. You've been circling Dad like vultures. Her eyes narrowed. That's not fair. We're just being practical. Dad's not... She stopped, glanced at Mark, then pressed on. Dad's not in the best position to handle everything alone. It makes sense for us to step in. I sat quietly listening, my coffee cooling in front of me. My silence only seemed to fuel David's anger. You mean it makes sense for you to take control, he shot back. Don't pretend this is about helping Dad. This is about money. About the house. About filling the holes Mark dug with his so-called business ventures. Mark's smile finally cracked. Careful, David. You don't know what you're talking about. I know enough, David snapped. I know you've been drowning in debt. And I know you've been pushing Emily to use Dad as a life raft. The table shook as Emily slammed her hand down. Enough. You think you're the only one who cares about Dad. You think standing there, looking righteous, makes you the better child. At least I'm here trying to make sure things are settled. David's face reddened, his voice rising. Settled for who, Emily? For Dad or for you? The room vibrated with their voices, the storm finally breaking inside these four walls. I felt my chest tighten, the air heavy, but I forced myself to stay seated to absorb every word. Because beneath the shouting, the truth was finally spilling out. And as Reverend John, who had been invited almost as a mediator, looked on from the corner of the room, he sighed. A long, weary sound that cut through the noise. His eyes found mine full of sorrow and warning, as though to say, you must be ready. The storm has only begun. The argument at Emily's table seemed to stretch on forever, every word striking me like hail against an old roof. David and Emily clashed like fire and ice, while Mark hovered close to her, feeding her lines, pushing her further than she might have gone alone. Reverend John's presence was the only thing keeping the storm from tearing the room apart entirely. Finally, I raised my hand. My voice was quieter than theirs, but it carried. Enough. For a moment, the room stilled. Emily's chest heaved as she tried to catch her breath. David's fists were clenched on the table, his knuckles white. Mark leaned back, crossing his arms, his smirk daring me to speak. I've listened to all of you, I said, my throat tight. I've listened to talk of money, of debts, of control, but not once have I heard a word about Linda, about what she wanted, about the kind of family she prayed we'd be. Emily flinched, her eyes darting away. Mark's smirk faltered for just a second. David lowered his gaze, his anger shifting into something more like grief. She wanted unity, I continued. Not this. Not children tearing each other apart over scraps that haven't even been placed on the table. My voice cracked then, but I pressed on. I buried my wife, and now I sit here watching my children fight like strangers. If that's what this inheritance does, then it's worth nothing. Silence settled over us, heavier than any shouting had been. Reverend John cleared his throat softly, his voice calm but firm. Robert's right. What I've heard here isn't concern, it's ambition, fear, pride. And those are poisons to a family. Emily bit her lip, tears brimming again. For a heartbeat, I saw the little girl she had been. But then Mark whispered something under his breath, and the hardness slid back into her eyes. David pushed his chair back, the legs scraping against the floor. I can't do this, he muttered, standing tall. Not like this. He turned and walked out, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. The slam of the front door jolted me like thunder. I sat frozen, staring at the coffee cup before me, the liquid long gone cold. My hands trembled against the table, and when I reached for the pill box in my pocket, it slipped. The small plastic case clattered to the floor, scattering pills across the tiles. I bent down, fumbling to collect them, my breath short. Emily gasped, moving as if to help, but Mark caught her wrist and shook his head. He's fine, he muttered. Leave it. Reverend John was already kneeling beside me, gathering the pills with steady hands. He pressed them back into my palm, his eyes searching mine with quiet urgency. Robert, he said softly, don't let them break you. Hold on. The will is soon. Hold on. That evening, back in my own house, the phone rang. The number on the screen was the law office. Thomas Baker's secretary reminding me of the reading. Her voice was polite, matter of fact, but the moment I hung up, my hand began to shake. The pillbox slipped again, hitting the hardwood floor this time. The sound echoed through the empty house, louder than it should have been. I sank into the chair, chest tight, staring at the scattered pills like they were the pieces of my life. The storm wasn't coming anymore. It was here. The night before, the will-reading sleep refused to come. I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling as the minutes dragged into hours. Every creak of the old house felt louder than it should like. The walls themselves knew tomorrow would decide more than property and papers. It would decide my dignity. I rolled onto my side and my eyes caught the photograph of Linda on the dresser. She was smiling. Her arm looped through mine from that summer trip to Lake Michigan. I sat up, took the frame in my hands, and whispered, "Linda, I wish you were here. You'd know what to say. You'd remind me not to let fear win." But the silence stretched long. I set the photo back gently, my hands trembling, and got dressed. The house felt too small for my thoughts, too heavy with the memories pressing in from every corner. I found myself walking to the church, the night air cool and damp. The steeple rose against the dark sky, its outline steady and familiar. I slipped inside through the side door, the sanctuary empty, except for the faint scent of candle wax and old hymnals. I knelt in the front pew, bowing my head. "God," I whispered, "I don't ask for riches. I don't even ask for peace. I ask for strength. Strength to face my children, to hold firm when they try to break me. And if Linda can hear me if she's near, I ask for her courage too." The sound of the door creaking open startled me. Reverend John stepped inside, his footsteps soft on the carpet. He didn't speak right away, just walked down the aisle and sat beside me. After a long pause, he said, "Linda trusted you, Robert. She trusted you with her love, with her family, with her last wishes. Don't forget that now." I swallowed hard, staring at the wooden cross above the altar. "It feels like I'm walking into battle tomorrow." "Then walk in knowing you're not alone," he said firmly. "David's with you. I'm with you. And more than that, the truth is with you." His words sank into me like warm light in cold air. For the first time in days, my breathing eased. When I returned home, David was waiting on the porch. He stood up quickly, where worry etched on his face. "Dad, I know tomorrow's going to be tough, but I want you to know no matter what happens in that room, I'm on your side, always." His voice carried no hesitation, and it steadied me more than I could say. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Thank you, son. I don't know how I'd face this without you." Inside, the house was quiet again, but the fear that had pressed so hard against my chest felt lighter. I still dreaded tomorrow, but at least I knew I wouldn't be standing alone. Across town, I could only imagine what Emily and Mark were planning. And as if to confirm it, I later learned that as they settled into bed, Emily leaned close to Mark and whispered, her voice sharp with certainty, "Tomorrow, everything changes." The hours dragged on, each one sharper than the last. I tried pacing the house, but every step only reminded me how empty it felt without Linda's presence. Her quilt on the back of the sofa, the faint scent of her favorite lavender soap still lingering in the hallway. It all pressed in on me, urging me to be strong, yet reminding me of how much I'd lost. At one point, I sat at the kitchen table, a pad of paper before me. I thought about writing down what I would say if tomorrow turned into a fight. Maybe I could put Linda's name into words, call out her memory in front of them, make Emily see what she was truly trampling on. But my pen hovered uselessly above the page. No speech, no clever phrasing could capture the weight of it. It wasn't about words. It was about resolve. I heard the crunch of tires on gravel and glanced through the window. David's truck was pulling out of the driveway. I realized he must have stayed there all night just in case I needed him. The thought steadied me. For all the fractures in my family, at least one bond still held firm. The next morning came slowly, light, spilling over the horizon like a reluctant confession. I poured myself a cup of coffee, though it went cold before I could take more than a sip. My hands wouldn't stay still. I found myself setting out my best shirt, the one Linda used to iron before Sunday services. As I buttoned it, I could almost hear her voice teasing me for fumbling with the cuffs. A knock on the door startled me. David stood there clean-shaven, a seriousness in his eyes. "Ready, Dad?" I nodded, though the truth was I would never be ready. We drove in silence through Springfield's quiet streets, past the diner where I'd once taken Emily for milkshakes, past the churchyard where Linda now rested. Each landmark seemed to whisper its own reminder, hold your ground. When we pulled into the parking lot of the law office, my heart thudded, like it was trying to break free. The building looked ordinary: brick walls, glass doors, a modest sign that read Thomas Baker, Attorney at Law. But to me it loomed like a courthouse, a place where verdicts were rendered and lives reshaped. I stepped out of the truck, my knees stiff, and felt David's hand steady on my elbow. For just a moment I closed my eyes, drawing in a long breath. "Linda," I whispered so softly only I could hear, "give me strength. Let me make you proud tomorrow." Across town, in a house filled with nervous energy, Emily and Mark were also preparing. She checked her reflection in the mirror, smoothed down her blouse, and tightened her jaw. "This is it," she told him. "After today, Dad won't have the final say anymore." And Mark, with that same smug grin, replied, "Just remember what I told you. Confidence wins the room." As for me, standing at the threshold of the law office, I knew the storm we'd been bracing for was about to break wide open. The law office smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood. As David and I walked in, my chest tightened. The waiting area was quiet. Too quiet, like the stillness before a storm breaks. Emily and Mark were already seated. Emily wore a blouse pressed so sharply it could cut, and her smile was thin, triumphant. Mark leaned back in his chair, one ankle resting on his knee, smirk planted firmly on his face. "Dad," Emily said, her voice sweet on the surface, but her eyes cutting straight through me. "I'm glad you came. It's important we all hear this together." I nodded without a word. My hands tightened on the cane I'd brought, though I didn't need it. Sometimes you carry a thing not for balance, but for resolve. David stood close by, his jaw tense. The receptionist led us into a conference room. The long oak table stretched out before us, polished to a shine, and at the head sat Thomas Baker, the attorney Linda, and I had known for years. His gray hair framed a lined face, but his eyes were sharp and steady. "Thank you all for being here," he began, his tone even. "We are here to execute the will of Linda Johnson." The words alone nearly undid me. Hearing her name spoken in that sterile room felt like a blow. I gripped the cane tighter, forcing myself not to crumble. Baker opened a folder, pulling out the neatly typed document. He adjusted his glasses and began to read. "Per the will, assets of the estate are to be divided among the children." Emily's face brightened instantly. She reached for Mark's hand under the table, squeezing it as if victory was already in her grasp. Mark's smirk deepened. Baker continued, "Property, including the family home, shall be transferred to the children jointly. Savings accounts are to be divided equally. Remaining personal effects may be distributed at their discretion." Emily's smile widened into a grin. "See, I told you," she whispered to Mark, not caring that we all could hear. I sat motionless, every word like a nail driven into me. David glanced at me, worry flickering across his face. He leaned closer and whispered, "Hold on, Dad. Just wait." Baker cleared his throat, then paused. His hand moved to the folder again. "There is one additional item," he said. Emily blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" Baker reached for a sealed envelope, yellowed at the edges, Linda's handwriting scrawled across the front. My heart lurched. I recognized it instantly, the way her loops dipped low, the gentle slant of her letters. "This was left with explicit instruction to be read after the will," Baker said. He broke the seal carefully, pulling out a single sheet of lined paper. He unfolded it slowly, smoothing the creases, then began to read aloud. "My dearest Robert, my husband, my partner, my friend. You stood by me through every storm. I trust you more than anyone in this world. It is my wish that all final decisions regarding our estate rest with you and you alone. The children will receive support for the education of their own children, but nothing more. They must learn to build lives with their own hands, not by leaning on what we earned. I know you will honor this, and I know you will stand strong." The words struck the table like thunder. Emily's mouth dropped open. "What? No, that's not what she wanted." Mark slammed his fist onto the oak surface, rattling the glasses of water. "This is a trick. That letter could have been forged. Baker looked at them coolly. It is not forged. It is signed in Linda's hand, witnessed and notarized. This letter carries the same binding authority. The estate rests with Robert Johnson. The room erupted. Emily's face turned red, her voice breaking into a scream. It's not fair. It's not fair. David stepped forward, placing a steady hand on my shoulder. Mom knew exactly what she was doing, he said firmly. She wanted Dad to be protected. Emily pounded her fists against the table. Tears streaked down her face. Mark glared at me with pure venom, his voice low but sharp as a knife. This isn't over. And in that moment, I felt something shift. For the first time since Linda's funeral, I wasn't the one on the defensive. I wasn't cornered. The ground beneath me steadied. The storm that had been building finally broke, not against me, but against them. The air in the conference room crackled like static after a lightning strike. Emily's sobs mixed with Mark's angry muttering. The sound grating against my ears. For years I had been silent, letting them push and prod, thinking that maybe restraint would heal the rift. But Linda's words, spoken through that letter, gave me the ground I had been waiting to stand on. Linda's decision is final, Baker said again, his voice steady as stone. No court will overturn it. You can argue all you want, but the law is clear. Mark leaned forward, his face twisted. You don't know who you're dealing with. I'll challenge this in probate. I'll drag it out until Baker cut him off. You'll lose, and you'll waste a great deal of money doing it. Money you don't have. The bluntness of it stunned even Emily, who looked at Baker like he had slapped her. David gave a low chuckle, shaking his head. Guess the gravy train just ran off the tracks. Emily turned on him, eyes blazing. Shut up. You think you're better than us. You've always been Dad's favorite. This is just another way of pushing me aside. I found my voice then firm but quiet. Emily. She froze at the sound of her name from my lips. This isn't about favorites. This is about your mother seeing the truth. She knew you and Mark were drowning in greed and fear, and she refused to let you pull me down with you. Her tears turned hot with anger. You're choosing him over me, over your own daughter. I'm not choosing, I said. Your mother already chose, and now you have a choice. Accept it, and learn to stand on your own, or keep clawing at what you can't have. The silence that followed was heavier than all the shouting. Emily slumped back in her chair, hands trembling, mascara streaking her cheeks. Mark sat rigid, his jaw working, unable to look at me. Baker closed the folder with a soft thud, final as a gavel. That concludes the reading. The estate is now legally Robert Johnson's responsibility. Meeting adjourned. Chairs scraped against the floor as everyone rose. David helped me to my feet, his steady hand a comfort. I glanced at Emily one last time. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Mark muttered under his breath. This isn't over, his voice low and dangerous, but it carried no weight anymore. As we walked out into the hallway, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, I felt a strange calm settle over me. For the first time since Linda's passing, I wasn't just enduring. I was holding the line. The receptionist gave me a small nod of respect as I passed. Outside, the sun broke through the gray clouds, lighting up the sidewalk. David squeezed my shoulder. You did it, Dad. Mom would be proud. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I lifted my face to the light, letting the warmth sink into me. Inside, the storm still raged, Emily's fury, Mark's resentment. But out here in the clear air, I could finally breathe. And in that moment, I felt Linda with me, not in the past tense, but present, whispering in the breeze, stand strong. When we stepped out of Baker's office, the hallway air felt lighter, though my chest was still heavy. David steadied me as we walked, and I caught a glimpse of Emily and Mark lingering behind. Their whispers followed us like the hiss of a snake, bitter and relentless. Outside, the parking lot shimmered under a pale sun. I thought maybe they would let things be, but Mark stormed past us, his face flushed. This isn't the end. I'll take you to court, old man, he spat. Before I could answer, Baker stepped out behind us, his voice clipped and final. You'll lose in probate, Mark. Don't waste your money. The law is clear. Mark froze mid-step, his mouth opening and closing without a word. Emily tugged at his arm, her cheeks wet, her voice cracked. Just stop, Mark, please. For once, he didn't fight back. They stood there, a picture of defeat, and for the first time in years, I felt taller than them. Word spread quickly in Springfield. By that evening, whispers had made their way into every pew of the church and across every porch in the neighborhood. People who had once greeted Emily with polite nods now avoided her. At the grocery store, Mrs. Peterson shook her head when she saw her. "It's shameful," I overheard her telling a friend. "Turning on your own father like that." The following Sunday, I took my usual seat at the back of the church. Reverend John stood at the pulpit, his Bible open, his gaze steady. He didn't mention names, but his sermon carried a weight that pressed on everyone's shoulders. "Honor thy father and thy mother," he said, his voice ringing through the sanctuary. "Not because they are perfect, but because they gave you life. To dishonor them is to dishonor yourself. To betray them is to betray the foundation of who you are." I saw Emily 2 pews ahead, her shoulders hunched, tears streaking silently down her cheeks. Mark sat stiff beside her, his jaw tight, unable to look up. The congregation's silence said more than words ever could. When the service ended, people clustered around me, hands on my shoulder, voices soft with sympathy. "You did right, Robert. Linda would be proud. We're with you." Each word felt like a stitch closing the wound Emily and Mark had torn open. Later that day, back at the house, Emily and Mark came to the porch. Their faces were drawn, stripped of triumph. Emily's voice cracked as she tried to speak. "Dad, we didn't mean—" I raised a hand, stopping her. "Your mother wanted you to stand on your own feet. That's her last gift. Don't waste it." David stood beside me, his presence steady as an anchor. He didn't gloat, didn't add to their shame. He simply stayed at my side, a quiet reminder that loyalty still lived in this family. Emily turned away, her sobs muffled against her hands. Mark muttered something I couldn't catch, but there was no bite left in his voice. They walked down the steps together, not in victory this time, but in silence. That night I stood on the porch alone. The air was cool, carrying the smell of cut grass and the faint hum of crickets. I looked up at the sky, wide and endless stars pricking through the dark. The breeze rustled through the trees, and in it I heard her Linda's laugh, soft and familiar, a sound carried on the wind. I closed my eyes, whispering into the night, "We did it, Linda." We stood firm. The following days unfolded like the slow turning of a page. The town never forgot what had happened inside that law office, nor what was spoken in church. I could see it in the way neighbors crossed the street to greet me, their hands lingering a little longer on my shoulder, their voices dipped with respect. And I could see it in the way they now looked at Emily and Mark, no longer with admiration or curiosity, but with pity, sometimes even disdain. At the diner where I often stopped for a cup of coffee, folks would lower their voices when Emily walked in. She used to chatter loudly, ordering pie with a kind of pride, but now she kept her head down. Mark came once, tried to sit at the counter but left before finishing his meal, the whispers chasing him out the door. One evening I sat on the porch with David. The air carried the smell of rain on the horizon. He leaned back in his chair, hands folded across his stomach. "You know, Dad, it's strange. All these years I thought silence was your weakness. But it turns out it was your strength. You waited. You let the truth speak when it was ready." I let his words sink in. Linda had always said David had her gift for seeing straight through to the heart of things. Sometimes silence is the loudest answer, I told him. The memory of Emily's tear-streaked face still tugged at me. No matter what she had done, she was still my daughter. But justice wasn't about softening the blow. It was about truth being seen, felt, and reckoned with. And this truth was heavy enough to change her if she let it. A few nights later, Reverend John came by. He carried with him a covered dish chicken casserole, the kind Linda used to bring to potlucks. He set it on the table and sat with me. "You stood your ground, Robert," he said gently. "That's no small thing. Sometimes justice doesn't shout. Sometimes it just waits until everyone can see it for what it is." I nodded, my gaze drifting toward the photograph of Linda on the mantel inside, her smile still warm, still steady. On Sunday morning, as the church bells tolled, I walked up the steps with David beside me. Emily and Mark were already there, sitting off to the side, their posture stiff, subdued. When our eyes met, Emily didn't sneer or look away. She simply lowered her gaze as if admitting what words could not. During the hymn, I felt the swell of something I couldn't quite name. Not triumph, not bitterness, something quieter, deeper. A release. That afternoon, when we returned home, I stepped out onto the porch alone. The sky stretched wide, painted in shades of gold and lavender. I breathed in, letting the stillness wrap around me. I whispered into the wind, "Linda, they know now. They've seen. You can rest." And in that silence carried on the evening air, I swore I heard her laughter again, soft, approving, and free. From this story, we can draw a profound and human lesson about family, filial piety, and justice. Parents dedicate their entire lives to sacrifice for their children, but when they are betrayed, truth and justice will always come to light. Money and property may blind people, but they can never replace love, respect, and gratitude. The ungrateful child must ultimately face judgment not only from the law, but also from the community and their own conscience. Silence, at times, is the greatest strength, for it allows truth to speak on its own. Most importantly, justice does not always arrive with shouts and anger. Often it comes through steadiness, resilience, and faith in moral values. This is a reminder for each of us to cherish our families and to live with responsibility. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box to the right.